When you look at history's really impactful leaders, you often find these incredible foundations behind them. Today, we're doing a deep dive into the roots of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, really focusing on, well, the two people most crucial to his upbringing, his parents.
Jijabai Bhonsle and Shahaji Raje Bhonsle. Yeah.
Exactly. You've shared some fascinating excerpts with us that highlight their influences, quite distinct but powerful.
Very distinct.
So our mission here is to sort of unpack what the source material specifically tells us about how his mother and father shaped the king he became.
Right, using just what we have here, it's such a vital angle, isn't it? We tend to focus on the main figure.
Yeah, the individual.
But these sources you've provided, they make it pretty clear that understanding his parents is, well, key to understanding Shivaji himself. Two very different forces working together, as the text described.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with Jijabai, often called Jijamata.
Yeah.
The text gives her full name, her father, Lakuti Jadhav, and her date's born around 1598.
And she passed away in 1674, which is interesting, just after Shivaji's coronation.
Right. And what do the sources really emphasize about her?
Well, her character, primarily. They describe her as religious, wise, and importantly, courageous. And they highlight her crucial role in raising Shivaji.
It wasn't just passive mothering then.
No, not according to this. The source says she actively instilled core values, patriotism, a deep sense of dharma, that idea of righteous duty.
Using stories, right?
Exactly. Stories from epics like the Ramayana and Mahabharata, really grounding him in that cultural and moral framework.
And the sources seem to position her as absolutely foundational to his whole vision of Swarajya.
Precisely. She's called the Rajmata, the mother of the empire. And significantly, the source labels her the spiritual guide of that dream of Swarajya, self-rule.
So she laid the foundation for that dream.
That's what the text suggests. It notes that while Shahaji, his father, was often away...
Down south, mostly.
Yeah. Jijabai was hands-on, managing affairs in Pune, directly guiding Shivaji during those really formative years. Her influence seems constant, very direct, and deeply spiritual and moral, according to these sources.
Okay, so that's Jijabai. What about his father, then? Shahaji Raje. The source gives his dates, too. Born around 1594, died 1664.
Right. In that hunting accident down in Karnataka, the source describes him as a brave Maratha general, a prominent nobleman.
And deeply embedded in the politics of the time.
Very much so. He served in the Deccan Sultanates, the Nizam Shahi of Ahmadnagar, the Adil Shahi of Bijapur, holding significant military posts and jagirs.
Jagirs. Those are like land grants giving administrative power.
Essentially, yeah. Land grants with revenue rights. The source even mentions he governed the Bangalore region for the Adil Shahi Sultanate for a time.
So, a man skilled in warfare and politics.
Exactly. The source points that out and says he passed this strategic thinking on to Shivaji.
Even though he was mostly based in Karnataka, how did that work?
Well, the source suggests that despite the distance, he ensured Shivaji got a good education and was exposed to his political vision. And crucially, this is a key point in the source he gifted Pune and the surrounding areas to Shivaji, placing them under Jijabai's direct care.
Right, so that provided the initial base.
Exactly. His first taste of political power and a direct connection to his father's military legacy right from the start. It wasn't just abstract influence.
So if we synthesize this, the source material kind of draws a clear line, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Jijabai, values, patriotism, dharma, leadership qualities, the spiritual core of Swarajya, the Rajmata.
The moral compass, the direct upbringing.
And Shahaji Raje.
Yeah.
The strategic background, that initial grant of political power in Pune, and the military legacy.
The structural foundation, you could say. And connecting that back to the source's conclusion, it's this combination that was key.
Right.
The texts state pretty clearly that Shivaji's path and the eventual formation of the Maratha Empire stemmed directly from his mother's moral and spiritual power.
Combined with his father's strategic and military groundwork, their sacrifices, values, teachings shaped him entirely, even if delivered differently.
Yeah, that's the picture the sources paint.
So looking just at these texts, what really stands out to you about how these two, well, very different kinds of influence managed to come together so effectively?
Well, the key takeaway from the sources really seems to be how Shivaji's path was forged by layering these influences. His mother's direct, very present, value-driven guidance.
Right there in Pune.
Layered onto his father's, let's call it structural and strategic foundation, which was often provided from a distance from Karnataka.
It does raise an interesting question. based purely on what the sources describe here.
Doesn't it? I mean, consider the different ways influence can work. You've got the constant, direct presence, the moral teaching like Jijabai in Pune, as the source portrays it, versus providing resources, structure, a strategic vision, sometimes from afar, like Shahaji Raja operating out of Karnataka. Two valid but very different methods.
So what does that tell us, maybe, about how leadership qualities are developed? Different paths, different styles of mentorship. Something to think about, definitely, looking at how these two influences shaped one of history's great figures, according to these texts.
Okay, let's dive in. We're talking about someone absolutely central to Indian history, but maybe often just seen in his son's shadow.
Exactly. Shahaji Raja Bhonsle, Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj's father.
And we've got some key excerpts here, sources that give us a real window into his life.
Right, and our mission really is to pull out the essentials from these, give you a quick, solid understanding of his role.
Yeah, which was significant, often overlooked, and maybe uncover some surprising things about his career.
Think of it like a shortcut to getting up to speed on the man who really laid the groundwork, even from far away.
So these sources, they jump right in, born, around 1594, near Aurangabad.
Yeah, into the Bhonsle family. Respective Maratha lineage, his father Maloji had already made a name.
And he marries Jijabai. Their sons, Sambhaji and, of course, the famous Shivaji. Shahaji passed away in 1664. Basic facts there.
But the context is crucial. He's growing up when the Deccan powers are constantly shifting.
Nizam Shahi, Adil Shahi, Mughals. It's a complex map.
Very. His father had secured lands and status under the Nizam Shahi in Ahmadnagar. Shahaji inherits that position.
And he rises fast as a warrior administrator.
Oh yeah, skilled. But as you said, the 17th Central Deccan, incredibly volatile.
Right. So the sources show he wasn't someone who just picked a side and stuck with it forever.
And that's where you see his political savvy. Real genius, actually.
How so?
Well, the Nizam Shahi started to weaken, under Mughal pressure.
Okay.
So Shahaji makes this critical pivot. He shifts his allegiance, his skills, everything, over to the Bijapur Sultanate.
The Adil Shah.
Exactly. And this wasn't just changing jobs. It was a high-stakes strategic gamble.
Must have required immense political skill.
Right.
Negotiating his place, building trust in a whole new court.
Totally. And under Bijapur, he becomes more than just a general, right?
Yeah, the sources mention he gets this significant jagir, basically a huge land grant.
Centered around Bangalore,
Yeah.
Massive territory in what's now Karnataka. He effectively becomes its governor.
Hundreds of miles south of the family's traditional lands near Pune. That's quite a shift.
It established his own sort of powerful mini-state down there.
So he's reeling this domain, the sources say, with real authority. His own court, army, administration in Bangalore.
Right. It shows he was much more than just a commander serving a sultan. He was a major power player himself.
Which makes his relationship with Shivaji so interesting because, like you said, he's building this power base in Bangalore.
While Shivaji's growing up near Pune, miles away.
So how did he influence Shivaji's path from that distance? What did the sources tell us?
This shows his strategy. Indirect support. Strategic delegation.
Okay.
The sources point out, while Shahaji is based down south, he appoints really capable, trusted people.
Like the Doji Kandeo.
Exactly. To manage the Pune states and oversee Shivaji's education, his training, his early development.
So Shahaji's providing the political legitimacy, the resources from his jagir, the key people on the ground.
Precisely. He's setting up the whole environment, the foundational support structure.
Even without being physically there day to day. That's fascinating.
And it was complex, The sources note, because of his position under Bijapur, he couldn't initially openly back Shivaji's, emerging rebellion.
Right. He had to balance loyalty to his employer with maybe setting up his son's future potential.
He was playing the long game, masterfully it seems, balancing these powers, building his own base, and laying the groundwork for Shivaji back home.
And his death. The sources say 1664.
Yeah, a hunting accident near Hodagar in Karnataka. That's where he's buried.
So looking back through these sources, you really see him differently, not just Shivaji's father.
No, a formidable figure. Warrior, shrewd administrator of huge territories, a really sophisticated diplomat navigating, treacherous politics.
And absolutely a foundational figure.
Critically foundational. His strategic positioning, his delegation from afar, it gave Shivaji the essential platform.
The political base, the admin structure, the early environment, all needed to eventually challenge the big powers.
He built the launchpad for the Maratha Empire.
So, Shahaji Raja Bhonsle, complex, powerful. Didn't just sire a legend.
He built the indispensable base that made the legend possible. His contribution was fundamental.
Truly was. Enabled everything that followed.
So what does this leave you, the listener, to think about?
Yeah, maybe consider the impact of historical figures who operate strategically, but from a distance.
Right. Laying groundwork, providing support indirectly through networks.
How does that kind of influence compare to those who are always right there on the front lines?
And which approach, maybe in certain situations, could actually be more impactful in the long run? Something to mull over. Okay, let's jump straight in. Today, we're doing a deep dive into a figure who, based on our material, was really crucial. We're talking about Rajmata Jijabai.
That's right. And for this, we're looking specifically at excerpts from Rajmata Jijabai, mother of Swaraja. So our mission really is to understand her role, in shaping Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj and the Maratha Empire's beginnings, but only based on what this text says.
Exactly, sticking strictly to this source. And it presents her as, well, much more than just Shivaji's mother, doesn't it? Like a political and spiritual guide.
It really does.
So to start, who exactly does the book say she was? The basics.
Okay, so the source identifies her as Jijabai Shahaji Bhonsle, daughter of Lakhuji Jadhav, wife of Shahaji Raja Bhonsle, and of course mother to Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. It gives her birth date as around 1598 CE.
And her deaths?
June 17th, 1674 CE.
Right, and the timing of that is significant according to the source, just after the coronation.
Yeah, the text really highlights that, just days after Shivaji was crowned. It's quite poignant.
Definitely. What about her early life? The source mentions it was a bit turbulent.
Very much so. The book talks about significant political instability.
Yeah.
She was born into this well-known Jadhav Rao family, famed for, valor, married young to Shahaji Raja.
And they moved around a lot.
They did. Places like Poon, Shivneri Fort, Rajgad. It was due to the unstable political climate back then.
Raising a future king amidst all that must have been challenging. The source really stresses her central role in Shivaji's life and this whole idea of Swaraja. How does it describe that?
It's quite direct. The text calls her the central force behind his upbringing and his vision.
Central force? That's strong. How does the source back that up? What did she actually do?
Well, it points to a few key things. First, the moral and spiritual foundation she built. The book says she used stories, from the Ramayana, Mahabharata, other great kings and heroes.
Ah, okay. So not just bedtime stories.
No, not at all. According to the source, she was using these epics to instill Hindu values, justice, bravery, devotion to Dharma, and this core idea of being a protector of people, of faith.
So using these ancient narratives as sort of moral instruction.
Precisely. Shaping his character through these examples. But it wasn't just spiritual. The source also mentioned she made sure he got practical education, martial training, the works.
Right, the skills he'd need.
Exactly. And crucially, the book emphasizes how she encouraged and really nurtured the dream of Swaraja. This vision of a kingdom free from foreign-rule Mughals, Adil Shahis specifically mentioned.
So the source suggests this idea, this ambition for an independent kingdom, really came from her, or was deeply fostered by her at least.
That's the strong implication in the text, yes. And it wasn't just ideals, it touches on her political role too.
Oh, like what?
Well, while Shahaji Raja was often away, the book says Jijabai handled administrative duties in Poon. It suggests she guided Shivaji on alliances, strategy, making tough calls.
So managing things on the ground, giving actual political advice.
Yes. And the source even credits her with inspiring his first major conquests. It specifically points to capturing Torna Fort as the moment that kind of kicked off the whole process of building the Maratha Empire.
Wow. So moral compass, practical education, political guidance, and the spark for empire building. That's quite a portfolio.
It really is, according to this text. Which brings us back to that moment in 1674.
Right, the coronation.
The source confirms she was there. She lived to see him crown Chhatrapati at Rigad Fort, and then, as we noted, passed away just days later. She saw the dream realized.
An incredible end to that journey. Does the book sort of list out her key qualities? What made her the central force?
It does, yeah. It explicitly calls her courageous, facing all that hardship.
Yeah.
Spiritual, deeply religious, guiding them morally. Visionary, holding onto that dream of Swaraja. And a wise leader managing administration, backing his campaigns.
Courage, spirituality, vision, wisdom, that's
Potent mix, yeah.
So if we pull all that together, just based on this source material, what's the final takeaway? How does the book frame her ultimate importance?
The source is very clear, very definitive on this. It says she was much more than a mother. She was his mentor, his guide, his spiritual guru.
Mentor, guide, guru.
Yes. And it makes the bold claim that without her vision, the discipline she instilled, her devotion, the very foundation of the Maratha Empire wouldn't have been possible. The source basically credits her with laying that essential groundwork.
The foundation would not have been possible. That's a huge statement from the text about her legacy. Rajmata Jijabai, the mother of Swaraja, as the title says.
Exactly.
Okay, so thinking about how the source describes her teaching methods, relying so heavily on the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, here's something to consider. How might those specific stories, those archetypes of heroism and duty she deliberately used, have actually shaped the character and the values of the Swaraja that Shivaji built? Something the source makes you wonder about. Welcome to this deep dive. We've got a stack of sources here, and they all point to one really crucial element: the forts in Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj's vision.
Absolutely. It's fascinating stuff. These sources show they weren't just background elements. Forts were, the absolute bedrock of his idea of Swaraja, of self-rule.
So our mission today is to unpack this. We want to get a sense of the sheer scale, the why behind it all, why these structures were so fundamental.
Let's get into it. The numbers alone are quite something.
Yeah, looking through these sources, the first thing that jumps out is the quantity. Over 350 forts associated with him. Captured, built, renovated.
This is a staggering figure, really is. And it's not just a number. The sources explicitly quote him. Forts are the pillars of Swaraja. That's direct.
Pillars, that's powerful. So did the sources elaborate on that? Why pillars? What made them more than just, say, military strongpoints?
Oh, definitely. They were vital militarily, no doubt, but they were also hubs, command centers, administrative points, places to keep treasure safe, store grain.
Okay, so like mini capitals dotted across the land.
In a way, yes, and safe havens too. For troops, for the local population when needed. They represented stability, authority, in a really challenging landscape, essential for building a state.
Right. And that focus seems to have shaped his whole military thinking, didn't it? The sources suggest he leaned into fort warfare, not so much big open field battles.
Exactly. He used the Sahyadri Mountains, the terrain itself, as an ally. Why meet large, cumbersome armies on their terms?
Makes sense. Those mountain forts would be incredibly hard to attack for armies reliant on, cavalry and heavy infantry?
Precisely, kind of negated their main strength. Smart strategy, leveraging the environment.
So how did he end up with over 350? Was it mostly taking existing forts or a lot of new construction too?
It seems to be a mix, based on what we're seeing here. He certainly captured many important ones, but he also built new forts when the strategic need arose.
Like Torna, that's often mentioned as the first one, right? Captured when he was just, 16?
Yeah, Torna's symbolic, a starting point. Then you see the evolution. Rigad later becomes the actual capital of Fort as the seat of empire. That tells you a lot.
And Pratapgad. The sources highlight that as one he built himself.
That's a key example. Built for a specific purpose, that famous confrontation with Afzal Khan, location was everything there.
Shows real foresight. And it wasn't just mountain forts, was it? Sintudur comes up.
Ah, Sintudur, yes, a sea fort. He commissioned that himself. Shows he was thinking about naval power, coastal control, not just the inland routes. Really advanced for the time.
Wow. So mountain forts, sea forts. What else? Any others that stand out in the sources?
Well, Shivneri, his birthplace, has that symbolic weight, of course. But strategically, you have Rajgad, an earlier capital. Sinhagad, famous for its capture. Purandar, important for defense and treaties.
And it seems like they were placed very deliberately, controlling passes, trade routes.
Absolutely. Lohalgad, Bisapur, Rajmachi, controlling the Ghats, the trade arteries. Then down on the coast, Vijaygarh, Alibag, Kasa. It was about controlling movement, resources, borders.
Land and sea.
Exactly. The sources even mention features inside the fort's hidden escape routes, reliable water tanks cut into rock, multiple walls designed to withstand sieges.
It paints a picture, doesn't it? Not just isolated castles, but a real interconnected network, those pillars he talked about.
That's the core idea, isn't it? Over 350 points, each playing a role, collectively forming the structure of his Swaraja. They provided the security, the stability needed to actually govern.
It's clear from these sources that forts were absolutely central. So thinking about that powerful idea, pillars of Swaraja, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? If forts were the pillars back then, what are the modern-day pillars that really support and protect a society, or maybe even a company or organization today? Something to think about. Okay, so let's unpack this. We've got a set of notes here, some excerpts, all focused on Sambhaji Maharaj, a really significant figure.
That's right. And what we want to do in this deep dive is really sift through these specific sources and pull out the key details. Who was he? What's his background, according to these notes?
Yeah, what do these notes highlight about his legacy? And straight away, there's something in here that just, wow, it jumps out.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
His languages. I mean, fluent in 14 languages? Is it?
Right here in the notes, yeah.
Yeah.
They specifically call out Sanskrit, Persian, Marathi, Portuguese, among others.
14. That level of, intellect is pretty amazing. But like you said, that's just one part of the picture these sources are painting.
It really is. And the sources quickly give us the basics. His full name, Sambhaji Bhonsle.
Right, son of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, obviously a huge figure himself, and his mother, Sidoji Nimbalkar.
And the notes pinpoint his birth. May 14, 1657. Place was Purandar Fort.
Okay, Purandar Fort. And the main focus, time frame-wise, seems to be his reign, right? From 1681.
Yes, 1681, crowned at Regad, the notes say, through to his death in 1689, a relatively short period, actually.
So not a long reign. And how do these sources initially describe him? What's the first impression?
Well, the words used right at the start are things like intelligent, brave, courageous. That seems to be the immediate takeaway the sources want us to have.
Okay. So intelligent, we see that with the languages brave, courageous, and he's the son of this legendary leader born into the early Maratha Empire.
Exactly.
So given that foundation from the notes, what's next? What path or challenges do they describe him facing right away?
Well, the narrative here jumps pretty quickly to him taking over after his father died. And the thing that's really stressed, really emphasized, is his role in defending the Maratha Empire.
Defending it. Against who?
The sources are very clear on this. He was fighting bravely, it says, against the Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb.
Wow, okay, so Aurangzeb. That's a major adversary. It sounds like these sources depict a period of really intense conflict.
Absolutely. That's the picture you get from these notes. A leader locked in this, almost existential fight against a huge, expanding empire.
Yeah, you can imagine the pressure. So, fighting Aurangzeb, how does that story end, according to this material?
It's pretty stark. The notes indicate that despite his resistance, Aurangzeb did eventually capture him.
Captured him?
Yeah. And then, the sources state he was killed. Tragically and brutally is the phrasing used. March 11th, 1689.
Right, March 1689. Okay, so let's pull these threads together just from what we have here in these notes. We've got the lineage, the striking intellect with the languages.
The bravery, the courage.
The fierce fight against Aurangzeb, and then this violent end. What does this specific collection of details tell us about his significance, according to the sources?
Well, what's really interesting looking only at these points is that contrast, isn't it? You have this person with clearly immense intellectual skills, 14 languages, including important ones like Persian for diplomacy. And right alongside that, this profound military courage, standing up to Aurangzeb. It paints a picture of someone with a combination of skills needed to lead a young state in that kind of turbulent time.
It really does. These specific points, just from this source material, they give you a snapshot of a leader who was significant, definitely, but his time was tragically short.
Defined by both that sharp mind and incredible bravery against huge odds.
So, thinking about just what these sources have shown us, it leaves you with a question, doesn't it?
What's that?
Well, based purely on this glimpse, you have the intelligence, the languages, the military resistance, and then this brutal end. What does that combination, as presented right here in these notes, suggest to you about leadership, about conflict in that era? What part of this story, as we've just discussed it from the sources, really stands out most to you, the listener?